Sarah Mitchell thought she knew what the worst day of her nursing career would look like. A lost patient, a medication error caught just in time, maybe even a lawsuit threat from an angry family member. She had prepared herself for those possibilities during her 2 years at Memorial Hospital. But nothing could have prepared her for the moment she realized she had sent the wrong man into surgery. Nothing could have prepared her for what she would discover when she tried to fix it. And absolutely nothing could have prepared her for the truth about why it happened.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing. Sarah's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she checked David Chen's wristband for the third time that morning. Patient ID number 847293. Date of birth, March 15, 1986. Scheduled procedure, removal of benign cyst from lower back. Everything matched the surgical consent form he had signed 20 minutes earlier. "You're going to do great, Mr. Chen," Sarah said, offering him a reassuring smile. She had perfected this tone over 2 years of pre-op nursing. Warm but professional, confident but not dismissive of patient anxiety. "Dr. Morrison is one of our best surgeons. You'll be in and out in less than an hour." David nodded, his fingers gripping the edge of the hospital gown. He was 38, according to his chart, though the worry lines around his eyes made him look older. "I've never had surgery before," he admitted. "Is it normal to feel like you want to run out of here?" Sarah checked his IV line, making sure the saline drip was flowing properly. "Completely normal. I've seen CEOs and firefighters get nervous before minor procedures. Your body is just trying to protect you. But I promise you're in good hands." She ran through her checklist one more time. Allergies? None documented. NPO status? Confirmed. Patient fasted since midnight. Surgical site marked? Yes, small X visible on his lower back, where the cyst would be removed. Consent signed? Yes. Pre-op medication administered? Yes. Mild sedative given 15 minutes ago. She'll be taking effect soon. "The anesthesiologist will be by in a few minutes to talk to you. Then we'll wheel you down to OR3. Your wife said she'll be waiting in the surgical waiting room?" "Yeah, Linda's grabbing coffee. She's more nervous than I am, if you can believe that." Sarah smiled. "Family members usually are. But seriously, Mr. Chen, this is routine. We do dozens of these procedures every week. You'll wake up wondering what all the fuss was about." She completed the final documentation, added her digital signature to the pre-op checklist, and flagged David's chart as ready for transport. The surgical tech would come in the next 10 minutes to wheel him down. Everything was proceeding exactly as it should. Sarah moved on to her next patient, a knee replacement in pre-op room 9, then circled back to check on a nervous teenager awaiting an appendectomy. The morning shift was busy but manageable, the kind of controlled chaos that Sarah had learned to navigate. She was good at her job. Meticulous, careful, the kind of nurse who double-checked everything and still worried she had missed something. It was Dr. Helen Morrison who had told her during her first week in nursing that perfectionism was both a gift and a curse in nursing. "It'll make you excellent, but it'll also eat you alive if you let it. You have to learn to trust your training." Sarah was still learning that lesson. By noon, David Chen was in the recovery room, and Sarah was reviewing charts for the afternoon surgical schedule when her phone buzzed. A text from the recovery room nurse. "Patient in Bay 7 asking questions about his procedure. Says something doesn't match what he expected. Can you come down?" Sarah frowned. Bay 7 was David Chen. Patients sometimes got confused coming out of anesthesia, their memories fuzzy about pre-op conversations. She locked out of her terminal and headed down to recovery, weaving through the busy hallway traffic of doctors, nurses, and the occasional lost family member. The recovery room was a long space divided by curtains, each bay containing a post-op patient being monitored as they emerged from anesthesia. Sarah found Bay 7 and pulled back the curtain. David was awake, more alert than she expected for someone just an hour post-op. His eyes locked onto her with an intensity that made her pause. "You're the nurse from before," he said, his voice clearer now, the sedative wearing off. "You told me I'd be in and out in an hour?" That's right, Mr. Chen. And you were. The surgery went perfectly according to— What surgery? David interrupted. My appointment is tomorrow. I checked my card 3 times this morning. Tomorrow, March 8th, 2 p.m. Sarah felt the first flutter of unease in her chest. Mr. Chen, you were scheduled for today, March 7th. We confirmed it multiple times before you went in. David's hand fumbled for something on the bedside tray. The recovery nurse had placed his personal belongings there: wallet, phone, keys, and a small appointment card from the hospital's outpatient surgery department. He held it up with a shaking hand. Sarah took the card. Her eyes scanned the printed information. Patient David Chen, DOB 3/15/1986. Procedure: cyst removal lower back. Date: March 8th, 2025. Time: 2 p.m. Surgeon: Dr. Helen Morrison. The words blurred slightly as Sarah read them again. March 8th, tomorrow, not today. There must be some confusion, she said, but her voice sounded distant to her own ears. Let me check your wristband. She reached for his wrist. Patient ID 847293. She pulled out her phone, accessed the hospital's patient portal, and entered the ID number. The screen loaded. David Chen, DOB, March 15th, 1986. Scheduled for cyst removal on March 8th, 2025. Sarah's throat went dry. She scrolled down further. Recent procedures, none listed. No surgery recorded for today. Her hand started to tremble as she opened a different screen, accessing the OR schedule for today, March 7th, 2025. She found OR 3, the room where David's surgery had taken place. OR 3, March 7th, 2025, 10:30 a.m. Patient David Chen, ID number 847293. Procedure: partial hepatectomy with lymph node dissection. Surgeon: Dr. Helen Morrison. Primary diagnosis: hepatocellular carcinoma, stage 2. The phone nearly slipped from her hand. Hepatectomy, liver cancer surgery. That wasn't a simple cyst removal. That was major surgery, hours long, removing a part of someone's liver. What's wrong? David asked, seeing her face. Why do you look like that? Sarah forced herself to breathe. She checked the wristband again, then checked the patient ID in the system again. They matched. Same number, same person, but 2 different procedures scheduled.
Sarah's mind raced through the impossible math. 1 patient, 1 ID number, 2 different surgeries. Then she saw it. The number on David's wristband was 847293. She pulled up the OR report again and felt her blood turn to ice. The patient who went into surgery this morning was ID 847293. But which David Chen was supposed to have liver cancer surgery today? Sarah's mind spun through the protocols, trying to understand what had happened. She excused herself from David's bay and walked quickly to the nurse's station, pulling up the master surgical schedule on the computer. March 7th, OR 3, David Chen, ID 847293. She searched for March 8th, OR 5, David Chen, ID 847293. The same ID number. That shouldn't be possible. Every patient in the hospital system had a unique identification number. There couldn't be 2 patients with the same ID. Unless— Sarah's fingers flew across the keyboard. She accessed the patient registration system and searched for David Chen with the birthdate 3/15/1986. 1 result, ID 847293. She searched again, this time for just David Chen with no date filter. 2 results appeared on the screen. David Chen, DOB 3/15/1986, ID 847293. David Chen, DOB 3/15/1986, ID 847294. Sarah stared at the numbers, 847293 and 847294. Sequential ID numbers, same name, same birth date, ID numbers that were only 1 digit apart. And Sarah had checked in the wrong one. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had verified the wristband, she had checked the ID number, but she had checked it against the surgical consent form that the wrong David Chan had signed, a form generated for patient 847294, but somehow given to patient 847293. Somewhere in the registration process, in the maze of paperwork and digital systems, the two patients had been confused. And Sarah, doing exactly what she was trained to do, had verified that yes, this patient matched this consent form, this ID matched this surgical schedule. No one had caught it. Not her, not the surgical tech who transported him, not the OR nurse who did the timeout procedure before surgery began. Not even Dr. Morrison, who had performed a major cancer operation on a man who didn't have cancer. Sarah's legs felt weak. She gripped the edge of the desk to steady herself. The man in Bay 7 had gone through a partial hepatectomy, a portion of his healthy liver removed, lymph nodes biopsied, hours under general anesthesia, major abdominal surgery for a disease he didn't have. And somewhere, another David Chan, the one who actually had liver cancer, had arrived at the hospital today expecting surgery that never happened, a surgery that had already been performed on someone else. Sarah's phone buzzed, another text from the recovery nurse. Patient increasingly agitated, needs explanation. She couldn't go back there, not yet, not until she understood the full scope of what had happened. She needed to find the other David Chen. She needed to tell Dr. Morrison. She needed to... Sarah? She turned. Dr. Morrison was standing behind her, still in her surgical scrubs, a coffee cup in hand. She looked tired but satisfied, the way she always looked after a successful operation. I was just reviewing the hepatectomy from this morning. Clean margins, no complications. The pathology samples are already on their way to the lab. Mr. Chen should have an excellent prognosis if we got it all. Sarah's mouth opened, but no words came out. Morrison's expression shifted. What's wrong? Did something happen in recovery? Dr. Morrison, Sarah managed, her voice barely above a whisper. We need to talk. In private. They moved to an empty consultation room, one of the small offices used for delivering difficult news to families. Sarah closed the door and turned to face the surgeon who had been her mentor, the doctor she admired most in the hospital. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. She explained everything, the two David Chens, the identical birth dates, the sequential ID numbers, the mixed-up paperwork, the wrong patient in OR3. Morrison listened without interrupting, her expression moving from confusion to disbelief to something Sarah couldn't quite read. When she finished, Morrison sat down heavily in one of the consultation chairs. You're telling me I just removed part of a healthy man's liver? Yes. And the patient who actually has liver cancer didn't get his surgery? I don't know where he is. He was scheduled for today. He should have checked in this morning, but I haven't seen any record of him arriving. Morrison rubbed her face with both hands. When she looked up, Sarah saw something she had never seen in her mentor's eyes before. Fear. This is catastrophic. For the patient, for you, for me, for this hospital. I know. We have to report this immediately. Patient safety, hospital administration, risk management. We need to find the other David Chen right now. If he has stage 2 liver cancer and missed his surgery window... Morrison stopped, not needing to finish the sentence. I know. She nodded back, fighting back tears. I'm so sorry. I checked everything. I followed every protocol. I don't understand how this happened. I don't either, Morrison said. But we are going to find out, and we are going to fix this. Come on. They left the consultation room together, Morrison walking with the determined stride of someone used to managing crises. They went straight to the hospital administrator's office, and within 15 minutes, a code yellow had been activated. Hospital terminology for a serious patient safety event requiring immediate investigation. The next 2 hours passed in a blur. Risk management coordinators, patient safety officers, the chief of surgery, everyone converging on the conference room where Sarah had to explain again and again exactly what had happened. A team was dispatched to find David Chen, ID 847294. They called the phone number on file, no answer. They called the emergency contact, Margaret Chan. She answered on the second ring. Mrs. Chan, this is Memorial Hospital. Is your husband David with you?
Yes, we're in the waiting room. We've been here for 4 hours. His surgery was supposed to be at 10:30 this morning. What's going on? Why hasn't anyone called us back to pre-op? Sarah listened to the one-sided conversation, her stomach churning. The right David Chan had been here. He had been waiting. While they were operating on the wrong man, the correct patient was sitting in the surgical waiting area, wondering why he was being ignored. A patient advocate was sent to the waiting room to escort both David and Margaret Chan to a private meeting room. Sarah wasn't allowed to be present for that conversation. She sat outside, staring at the wall, while inside the room, hospital administrators explained to a man with liver cancer that his surgery had been performed on someone else. She could hear the raised voices through the door. Margaret Chan's anguished, "How does this happen?" David Chen's shocked silence, the careful apologetic tones of the administrators trying to contain the damage. Dr. Morrison emerged from the room looking 10 years older. She sat down next to Sarah in the hallway. "They're scheduling his surgery for tomorrow morning, first case. I'll be performing it personally. The delay shouldn't significantly impact his prognosis, but we won't know for certain until we're in there." "And the other David Chen, the one we operated on? He's still in recovery. They're keeping him sedated while we figure out how to tell him what happened." Morrison's voice was flat, drained. "I'm going to lose my license." "You might, but Sarah, I need you to understand something. This wasn't just on you. I was the surgeon. I'm supposed to do a final verification before first incision. I didn't catch it either. The OR nurse didn't catch it. The anesthesiologist didn't catch it. This was a system failure. But I was the first point of contact. I checked him in. I verified." "You verified what the system told you to verify. Someone registered these patients with nearly identical information. Someone generated a consent form for the wrong patient. Someone printed a wristband with the wrong procedure. Yes, you should have caught it, but so should half a dozen other people." Sarah wanted to believe that. She wanted to believe this wasn't entirely her fault, but the image of David Chen, the wrong David Chen, looking at her with confused, trusting eyes, kept replaying in her mind.
"I should have asked more questions," Sarah said. "He seemed nervous, more nervous than usual for a simple cyst removal. I should have—" "Sarah," Morrison's voice was sharp, "stop. Second-guessing yourself into paralysis isn't going to help anyone. We have 2 patients who need us focused. We need to figure out exactly how this happened so it never happens again." A patient safety officer approached them. "We've completed the preliminary system review. You both need to see this." They followed her to a computer terminal, where she pulled up the registration records for both David Chens. "Look at the timestamps," she said. David Chen, ID 847293, had been registered on February 22nd at 2:47 p.m. for a cyst removal scheduled for March 8th. David Chen, ID 847294, had been registered on September 15th of the previous year for an oncology consult with subsequent appointments and scheduling updates leading to the March 7th surgery date. "Now look at this," the safety officer said, clicking through to a different screen. "This is the system log for surgical scheduling." She pointed to an entry dated March 5th, 2 days ago. "System update. Patient ID 847294. Surgery date modified from March 7 to March 8, 2 p.m. Modified by user admin 7732. Sarah's eyes widened. "Someone changed the surgery date?" 2 days ago. Someone with administrative access went into the system and moved patient 847294's surgery for March 7th to March 8th, 2 p.m. that created an opening in the March 7th OR schedule. "But we still operated on someone on March 7th, Morrison said. "Who filled that slot?" The safety officer pulled up another log. "System update. Patient ID 847293, surgery date modified from March 8th to March 7th, 10:30 a.m., modified by user admin 7732, same date, March 5th. Sarah felt dizzy. Someone deliberately switched their surgery dates? It looks that way. The question is why, and who is admin 7732? The safety officer typed rapidly. "That's an administrative user account. It has override capabilities for scheduling. Let me see who it's assigned to." The screen loaded. User admin 7732 assigned to Barbara Hendricks, surgery scheduling coordinator. "Barbara?" Sarah said.
She knew Barbara Hendricks. Everyone knew Barbara. She had worked in surgery scheduling for 15 years. She was the person you went to when you needed a schedule changed or a complicated case fit into the OR lineup. "We need to talk to her," Morrison said. "Right now!" Barbara Hendricks wasn't at her desk. According to her supervisor, she'd called in sick that morning, the first sick day she'd taken in 3 years. And when they called her home number, her husband answered with a question that made everyone in the room go silent. "Are you calling about David? Is he okay? Did something happen during his surgery?"
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The conference room erupted into activity. Phone calls were made, questions were shouted. Sarah sat frozen in her chair as the pieces started to come together in a way that made her head spin. The patient safety officer was on her phone, speaking rapidly to someone. When she hung up, she addressed the room. "Barbara Hendricks is married to David Hendricks. They've been married for 12 years. He recently changed his name." "Changed it to what?" Morrison asked, though Sarah could see in her mentor's eyes that she already knew the answer. "David Chen. Legally changed 6 months ago." The room went completely silent. Sarah's mind raced back through everything. David Chen, ID 847293, the man with liver cancer, had registered 6 months ago, right after a legal name change. Emergency contact, Margaret Chen, wife. But the safety officer had just said Barbara Hendricks was married to a David who recently became David Chen, and the emergency contact for the cancer patient was listed as Margaret Chen, not Barbara. "Pull up both patient files," Morrison ordered. "Full demographics." The safety officer projected both files on the conference room screen. David Chen, ID 847293, age 38, home address 427 Maple Street, emergency contact Linda Chen, wife. David Chen, ID 847294, age 38, home address 1893 Riverside Drive, emergency contact Margaret Chen, wife. "Margaret is Barbara's middle name," the safety officer said quietly, checking employee records. "Barbara Margaret Hendricks." Morrison leaned forward. "Are you telling me that Barbara Hendricks, our surgery scheduling coordinator, is married to one of the David Chens, the one with cancer?" "It appears so. And she switched the surgery dates 2 days ago, ensuring her husband would be operated on March 7th, and the other David Chen would be scheduled for March 8th? Why would she—" She stopped mid-sentence. "Pull up insurance information for both patients." The safety officer's fingers flew across the keyboard. David Chen, ID 847293, Blue Cross Blue Shield, premium coverage, $500 deductible. David Chen, ID 847294, state Medicaid, awaiting approval for indigent care fund assistance. Sarah's breath caught. The David Chen with cancer, Barbara's husband, was on Medicaid. The other David Chen, the one who actually got the surgery, had premium private insurance. "Insurance fraud," Morrison said, her voice hollow. "She switched them so her husband would get the surgery billed to someone else's insurance." "But that doesn't make sense," Sarah protested. "The surgery already happened. His name is on all the records. The insurance company would see." "Unless she planned to switch them back," the patient safety officer interrupted. "Look at the scheduling system. There's a pending change queued for tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. She pulled up a draft modification in the system. Pending system update, scheduled for March 8th, 6 a.m., patient ID 847293 and 847294, surgical records to be swapped. All documentation, billing, and medical records to reflect corrected patient identities. Reason, administrative error correction." Sarah stared at the screen. She was going to switch everything back? Make it look like the right patient got the right surgery all along? "Not just that," Morrison said, studying the pending changes. "Look at the medical record swap.
She was going to make it appear that David Shen 847294, her husband, was the one who came in for cyst removal tomorrow, and that David Chen 847293 was the cancer patient who was successfully operated on today. All the pathology samples, all the surgical notes, all the billing, everything would be in the wrong file. But we would notice, Sarah said. The doctors, the nurses, the patients themselves would know something was wrong. The safety officer shook her head slowly. By the time anyone noticed individual discrepancies, the insurance claim would already be processed. Blue Cross would pay for the hepatectomy, and Barbara's husband would have received a surgery worth over $200,000 billed to someone else's insurance with all the paperwork appearing legitimate. Morrison stood up and paced the room. But she didn't account for the patients checking in on the same day at first. She moved her husband's surgery to March 7th and the other David Chen to March 8th so they wouldn't overlap. She probably thought the insurance mix-up wouldn't be discovered until weeks later, if ever. She couldn't have known that the other David Chen had an appointment card for March 8th or that he would bring it to the hospital and figure out something was wrong immediately after surgery. She also didn't know that David Chen with the cyst removal would show up a day early, according to the outpatient scheduling system. Patient ID 847293 confirmed his March 8th appointment yesterday, but he showed up this morning. Sarah closed her eyes, remembering. I saw him in the pre-op area. He looked confused when I called his name. I thought he was just nervous. He said he thought this was tomorrow, but then he signed the consent form anyway. I thought he was just confused about the date. He probably was confused, but when you showed him a consent form with his name on it and all the proper official documentation, he assumed he had made a mistake. He trusted the system. He trusted us. The enormity of it crashed over Sarah again. A scheduling coordinator had deliberately exploited the system, creating a situation where two patients with the same name would be mixed up. The wrong man had been operated on not because of a simple clerical error, but because someone had orchestrated it. We need to call the police, the hospital administrator said, speaking for the first time in several minutes. This isn't just medical malpractice, this is fraud, possibly identity theft, maybe even assault, depending on how the DA wants to charge it. And we need to tell the patients, Morrison added. All of this context. They deserve to know this wasn't random chance or a simple mistake. Over the next hour, police were called. Detectives arrived. Barbara Hendricks was contacted and asked to come to the hospital for an administrative meeting. She arrived looking nervous, not knowing that her digital trail had already been uncovered.
Sarah wasn't present for Barbara's questioning, but she heard later that the scheduling coordinator had broken down within minutes, confessing everything. Her husband had been diagnosed with liver cancer 8 months ago. Their insurance had lapsed during a brief period of unemployment. By the time David got Medicaid, the cancer had progressed to stage 2. The surgery was expensive, and even with Medicaid, there would be substantial out-of-pocket costs they couldn't afford. Barbara had access to the scheduling system. She saw the other David Chen register for a minor procedure. Same name, same birthday, different patient. Premium insurance. She had seen an opportunity and taken it, thinking she could swap the records before anyone noticed, giving her husband the care he needed while billing it to someone else. She hadn't meant for anyone to get hurt. She thought she was just manipulating paperwork, not realizing that her actions would result in an innocent man undergoing major surgery for a disease he didn't have. The police arrested Barbara Hendricks that evening. She was charged with insurance fraud, identity theft, and reckless endangerment. Her husband, David Chen Hendricks, was interviewed but not charged. He claimed he had no knowledge of his wife's plan, though investigators would continue to look into whether he had been complicit. Sarah spent the rest of that day and the following morning in meetings with hospital administration, risk management, and the state medical board. The investigation into the incident would take weeks, but the immediate question was what happened next. David Chen, ID 847293, the man who received the wrong surgery, was recovering physically but was understandably traumatized. The hospital was offering to cover all his medical expenses, including future monitoring of his liver function and any complications that might arise. His lawyers were already preparing a lawsuit. David Shen Hendricks, ID 847294, the cancer patient, had his surgery performed the next morning as promised. Dr. Morrison operated, successfully removing the tumor with clean margins. He would need follow-up treatment, but his prognosis was good. Whether his insurance would cover the procedure now that the fraud had been exposed was a legal question still being worked out. Sarah spent the rest of that day and the following morning in meetings with hospital administration, risk management, and the state medical board. The investigation into the incident would take weeks, but the immediate question was what happened next. David Shen, ID 847293, the man who received the wrong surgery, was recovering physically, but was understandably traumatized. The hospital was offering to cover all his medical expenses, including future monitoring of his liver function and any complications that might arise. His lawyers were already preparing a lawsuit. Sarah was placed on administrative leave, pending the completion of the investigation. It was standard procedure, she was told, not a punishment, just protocol. But it felt like punishment. It felt like her career was over before it had really begun. 3 days later, Sarah received a phone call that made her question everything she thought she understood about what had happened. It was from Linda Chen, wife of the David Chen who had been wrongly operated on, and she wanted to meet Sarah in person. "There's something about my husband I need to tell you," Linda said. "Something that changes everything."
Sarah agreed to meet Linda Chen at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the hospital. She had no idea what to expect. An angry confrontation, a demand for answers. She prepared herself for justified rage. Instead, Linda Chen was composed when Sarah arrived, sitting in a corner booth with 2 cups of coffee already ordered. She gestured for Sarah to sit down. "Thank you for coming," Linda said. She was in her mid-30s, attractive in a tired way, with dark circles under her eyes suggesting she hadn't slept much recently. "Of course," Sarah said carefully. "Mrs. Chen, I want you to know how deeply sorry I am for what happened to your husband. There are no words." Linda held up a hand. "I know. I've heard the apologies from the hospital, from Dr. Morrison, from the administrators. That's not why I asked you here." Sarah waited, confused. Linda took a deep breath. "My husband is recovering well physically. The surgery, despite being unnecessary, was performed competently. He'll be okay." "That's good to hear," Sarah said, though she sensed there was more coming. "But there's something no one knows. Something David hasn't told anyone, including me until yesterday. And I think you deserve to know, because it's been eating me up inside." Sarah felt a cold prickle of apprehension. "What is it?" Linda pulled out her phone and opened a photo. She slid it across the table to Sarah. It showed a medical document, a pathology report. Sarah recognized the hospital's letterhead. "This is from 4 years ago. David had surgery to remove what they thought was a benign cyst from his liver. A different hospital, different city, before we moved here. They removed it and sent it to pathology." Sarah looked at the pathology report. The diagnosis at the bottom made her heart skip. "Atypical hepatocellular nodule with dysplastic features. Recommend close monitoring for potential malignant transformation." The doctors told him he needed follow-up screenings every 6 months, MRIs, blood work, the whole protocol, to catch it early if it became cancer. "Did he do the follow-ups?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer. Linda shook her head. "He did the first 2. Then he changed jobs. We moved. His insurance was in flux, and he just stopped. He kept meaning to find a new doctor, kept putting it off. You know how people are with medical stuff when they feel fine. He felt fine, so he figured it could wait." Sarah stared at the pathology report, understanding dawning. "Mrs. Chen, are you telling me I'm telling you that when the hospital ran pathology on the liver tissue they removed during the surgery, they found early-stage hepatocellular carcinoma. Stage 1. They found cancer, Sarah, in my husband's liver. The coffee shop seemed to tilt. Sarah gripped the edge of the table. But he was there for a cyst removal. A benign cyst on his back. He didn't have liver cancer. He didn't know he had liver cancer, Linda corrected. But apparently he did. The oncologist who reviewed his pathology report after the surgery said that given his history with the atypical nodule 4 years ago, this was likely a slow transformation. It could have been there for months, maybe longer, and because David never followed up with screening, no one caught it. I couldn't speak. My mind was reeling. The oncologist said if they hadn't found it now, if David had continued without screening, it probably would have progressed to stage 2 or 3 before causing symptoms. By then, it would have been much harder to treat, maybe not treatable at all. So the surgery, Sarah said slowly, the wrong surgery accidentally removed a cancer that your husband didn't even know he had? Yes, Linda said. The surgical margins were clean. They got it all. David doesn't need chemotherapy or radiation, just monitoring. The doctors are calling it an incredibly fortunate catch. Sarah leaned back in the booth, her mind spinning. Does the hospital know this? The pathology department knows. It's in the official report, but I don't think anyone has connected the dots yet. Everyone is so focused on the mistake, the wrong patient, the insurance fraud, the investigation. No one is talking about the fact that the mistake might have saved my husband's life. Why are you telling me this? Linda looked down at her coffee. Because I saw how the hospital administrators talked about you. They're making you the scapegoat. The nurse who didn't catch the error, but you need to know that yes, you made a mistake that hurt my husband, and yes, he had to go through an unexpected surgery, but you also, completely by accident, gave him a chance he wouldn't have had otherwise. You saved his life. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. That doesn't excuse what happened. No, it doesn't, Linda agreed. Barbara Hendricks created a dangerous situation. You and the other medical staff should have caught it. Systems failed. But Sarah, my husband is alive and cancer-free because of that failure. And I needed you to know that before you destroy yourself over this. They sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Sarah asked, "What are you going to do with the lawsuit?" "We're still going forward with it," Linda said firmly. "What happened was wrong, and the hospital needs to fix their systems so it never happens to anyone else. My husband still went through trauma. He still faces potential complications, but we're not going to let them make you the villain in this story. The villain is the person who deliberately manipulated the system. You were trying to do your job. You just got caught in someone else's scheme." Sarah drove home that afternoon in a daze. Everything she thought she understood about the incident had been turned upside down. The wrong surgery had accidentally become the right surgery. The mistake that might end her career had also saved a life. But it didn't change the fundamental truth. Systems had failed. She had failed to ask enough questions, and another patient, David Chen Hendricks, had been denied his surgery because of fraud. The investigation continued over the following weeks. Sarah remained on administrative leave, undergoing multiple interviews with hospital officials and the state medical board. The story made local news. Hospital scheduling coordinator arrested for insurance fraud scheme, though most outlets focused on Barbara Hendricks rather than Sarah. Dr. Morrison kept in touch throughout, calling Sarah every few days with updates. The hospital was implementing new verification protocols, dual identifier checks, automated system alerts for patients with similar names, mandatory secondary verification of surgical consent by 2 separate staff members. They're naming the protocol after this case, the Chen Protocol. It's going to be published in the Journal of Patient Safety. Other hospitals will learn from this. I don't make me feel better, Sarah admitted. It shouldn't, Morrison replied, but it should mean something. We can't undo what happened, but we can make sure it never happens again. 6 weeks after the incident, Sarah was called to a final review meeting with the hospital's Patient Safety Committee and the State Medical Board representative. She prepared herself for the worst: license suspension, permanent dismissal, her career over at 29. Instead, she was presented with a different outcome. Ms. Mitchell, we've completed our investigation into the incident involving patients David Chen. We've reviewed the timeline, the system failures, the role of Barbara Hendricks, and your actions throughout. Sarah held her breath. While you were the initial contact point where the error could have been caught, we've determined that you followed all standard protocols at the time. You verified the wristband, you checked the ID number, you reviewed the consent form. The system itself had been compromised by deliberate fraud, creating a scenario where following protocol led to the wrong outcome. The representative paused, looking directly at Sarah. You are not being held primarily responsible for this incident. However, we are requiring you to complete additional training in patient verification procedures and to participate in the development of the new Chen protocol procedures. Sarah's eyes widened. I'm not losing my license? No, you're not. You're not being terminated either, though that decision ultimately rests with the hospital. We're recommending you're allowed to return to work with the additional training requirements. The hospital administrator spoke next. Sarah, we'd like you to return to Memorial Hospital, not to pre-op newsing. We think that might be traumatic for you given what happened, but we'd like you to work with our patient safety department, helping to implement the new protocols and training other staff. You've lived through what can happen when systems fail. That makes you valuable to us in preventing it from happening again. I don't know what to say, Sarah finally managed. Say yes, Morrison said from across the table. Say you'll help us make sure no nurse ever has to go through what you went through. Sarah nodded, tears streaming down her face. Yes, I'll do it.
3 months later, Sarah was settling into her new role in patient safety when she received an unexpected email. It was from Margaret Chen, Barbara Hendricks' sister-in-law, and the wife of David Chen Hendricks, the cancer patient. The email was brief. Would you be willing to meet? I have questions about what happened to my husband. I'm trying to understand Barbara's choices. Please. Sarah hesitated. She had been trying to move forward, not dwell on the past, but something in the email's tone compelled her to respond. She agreed to meet at the same coffee shop where she had met Linda Chen months before. Margaret Chen was different from what Sarah had expected. She was younger than Barbara, maybe early 30s, with an understated elegance that spoke of someone who had once had money, but was now wearing clothes from several seasons past. Her eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted. Thank you for meeting me, Margaret said as Sarah sat down. I know this is probably the last thing you want to revisit. It's okay, Sarah said, though she wasn't sure it was. How is your husband recovering? Physically well. The surgery was successful. Dr. Morrison got clean margins. His follow-up scans show no sign of remaining cancer. But emotionally, Mark exhaled off. He's struggling with the knowledge of what Barbara did. She's a sister. Was his sister. He doesn't know how to process that she would endanger someone else to save him. Is she still in custody? No, she posted bail. The trial is in a few months. But, Sarah, that's not why I asked you here. Margaret leaned forward. I've been going through everything that happened, trying to understand, and there's something that doesn't make sense, something I think you should know. Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest. What is it? Margaret pulled out a folder from her bag. Inside were printed emails, documents, medical records. Barbara and I were never close. She married my husband's brother, then they divorced, but she kept the connection to the family. When David got sick, my husband, Barbara was there. She helped us navigate the system, used her knowledge of hospital operations to get him appointments, to expedite his diagnosis. That sounds like she cared. She did. She was obsessed with saving him. But here's what I found. Margaret pushed an email across the table. It was dated January 15th, 2 months before the surgery incident. This is an email from Barbara to a private investigator. Sarah read the email. Barbara was asking the investigator to find someone with specific criteria. Male, approximately 38 years old, birth date in March 1986, named David Chen, with premium health insurance, living in the greater metropolitan area. She was looking for a match, Sarah said slowly. She was actively hunting for someone with the same name and birth date as her husband. Yes, and look at this document. Margaret showed Sarah another document. This is from the private investigator's report, dated January 28th. He found 3 potential matches. 3 men named David Chen, born in March 1986, living within 50 miles. One of them was Linda Chen's husband. Sarah felt sick. So this wasn't a coincidence. Barbara didn't just stumble across another David Chen in the system. She found him deliberately. She found him, researched him, and when he registered at the hospital for a minor procedure, she saw her opportunity. She created this situation, Sarah. She orchestrated every detail. But why tell me this? The police already know she committed fraud. Margaret's expression darkened. Because there's more. Look at this patient registration form. She showed Sarah a document that made Sarah's blood run cold. It was David Chen, ID 847-293's original registration form from when he had scheduled his cyst removal. The form was dated February 22nd, but there was notation in the system log that Margaret had somehow obtained. Registration completed remotely by hospital staff member using patient proxy authorization. Barbara registered him, Sarah breathed. She called him pretending to be from the hospital and got his information, then registered him herself? I think so. And look at his appointment confirmation email. Margaret showed her another document. The email came from the hospital system, but if you look at the metadata, it was sent from Barbara's workstation. She scheduled his appointment. She controlled when he would come in. Sarah's mind was racing. So she deliberately scheduled him for March 8th, so that when she moved her husband to March 7th, there would be a day buffer. But then something went wrong. David Chen, Linda's husband, showed up a day early. He got confused about his appointment date and came in on March 7th instead of March 8th. Barbara's plan was for them to never overlap. She was going to perform the record swap while both surgeries were happening on different days, making it look like a simple administrative correction. But because he came early, he was there on the same day as her husband's scheduled surgery, and the system, seeing a David Chen scheduled for surgery on March 7th, pulled his information. The fraud unraveled immediately because the patients were both in the hospital at the same time. Exactly. Margaret sat back. Sarah, Barbara didn't make a mistake. She created an incredibly sophisticated fraud scheme that would have worked if not for one patient showing up on the wrong day. And I think she was prepared to do much more than just swap insurance billing. What do you mean? Margaret pulled out one final document. It was a life insurance policy. This is a policy on Linda Chen's husband. It was taken out 6 weeks ago by an anonymous party through an online insurance broker. Death benefit? $500,000. Beneficiary listed as estate of insured, but there's a contingent beneficiary clause. Sarah looked at the contingent beneficiary name. Her blood turned to ice. Barbara Margaret Hendricks. You're saying Barbara took out a life insurance policy on a stranger? On a stranger who was about to undergo what she thought was major surgery. Hepatotomy is serious, Sarah. There are risks, complications. And if something went wrong during that surgery, if David Chen had died on the operating table, Barbara would have gotten $500,000, Sarah finished. On top of getting the surgery for her husband billed to someone else's insurance. The coffee shop suddenly felt too small, too airless. This wasn't just insurance fraud. She was willing to risk a life. She might have even been hoping for complications. Margaret said quietly. Yes, that's what I think. And that's what I've given to the police. The DA is reviewing the evidence now. They're considering adding more serious charges. Reckless endangerment is no longer sufficient. They're looking at attempted manslaughter, maybe even attempted murder, if they can prove intent. Sarah's hands were shaking. I need to tell Dr. Morrison. The hospital needs to know. They already know. I sent this information to them yesterday. But I wanted you to know personally. Because you've been carrying guilt about this incident, about not catching the error. Sarah, there was no way you could have caught it. Barbara designed this scheme specifically to exploit every gap in the system. She knew the protocols. She knew the weaknesses. She created a situation where everyone following proper procedure would still result in the wrong outcome. But people could have died. Did she understand that? I think she understood and didn't care. My husband was dying. In her mind, saving him justified any risk to anyone else. She saw David Chen as a means to an end. If he survived, great. She got the insurance fraud. If he didn't, even better. She got the life insurance payout too.
Sarah stood up abruptly. I need to go. I don't know what I need to do. Margaret stood as well, placing a gentle hand on Sarah's arm. You need to stop blaming yourself. You were a victim of this just as much as my husband and Linda's husband were. Barbara manipulated all of us. She manipulated the system. She manipulated her family. She manipulated you. Sarah nodded numbly and left the coffee shop in a daze. She drove straight to the hospital and found Dr. Morrison in her office. Tell me you already know about the life insurance policy, Sarah said without preamble. Morrison looked up from her desk, her expression grim. I know. The police briefed us this morning. They're reinvestigating the entire case with this new information. She was willing to let someone die, Dr. Morrison, an innocent person, for money and to save her husband? I know. Morrison gestured for Sarah to sit. The DA's office believes they have enough for attempted murder charges, but it's going to be difficult to prove intent. Barbara will claim she never intended for anyone to be harmed, that the life insurance policy was just an opportunistic addition to the fraud scheme, not the primary motive. Do you believe that? Morrison was quiet for a long moment. No, I don't. I think she researched David Chen thoroughly. I think she knew he was healthy, knew the surgery would be risky for someone who didn't actually need it, and I think she calculated that there was at least a chance he wouldn't survive, and she was fine with that. Sarah slumped in her chair. How did we not see this? How did I not see this? Because Barbara was one of us. She worked here for 15 years. She was trusted, liked. She had access and authority, and no one thought to question her motives because why would we? We don't expect the people we work with to be capable of something like this. What happens now? Now we wait for the legal system to do its job. The hospital is cooperating fully with the investigation. Barbara's trial has been expedited given the new charges. And Sarah, there's something else you should know. Morrison pulled out a letter from her desk drawer. This came from Linda Chen's attorney. They're dropping the lawsuit against the hospital. Sarah's eyes widened. What? Why? Because of what Linda told you months ago. Because her husband's accidental cancer diagnosis saved his life. They're not saying the hospital did nothing wrong. They're very clear about that. But they're acknowledging that the outcome, despite the trauma, was ultimately positive for them. They don't want to punish the institution when it was one individual's actions that caused the harm. That's incredibly generous. It is, but they have conditions. They want the hospital to establish a patient safety fund in their name. They want mandatory annual audits of the scheduling system, and they want you to be the face of the new safety training program. Sarah looked up sharply. Me? You. Linda Chen specifically requested that you be the one to train new staff on what can go wrong when systems are compromised and when we don't ask enough questions. She thinks you have a unique perspective on this. She thinks you can prevent it from happening to anyone else. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. I don't know if I can do that. Stand in front of people and talk about my failure? It wasn't your failure, Sarah. It was Barbara's crime. But yes, you were part of the chain of events. And that's exactly why you're the right person to teach others. You lived it. You know the guilt, the self-doubt, the questioning of every decision. You can help new nurses understand that following protocol isn't enough if the protocol itself has been compromised.
You can teach them to trust their instincts when something feels wrong. Sarah thought about David Chen looking at her with confused eyes, saying, "I thought this was tomorrow." She had dismissed his concern, trusted the paperwork over his uncertainty. What if she had paused? What if she had asked more questions? "I'll do it. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure this never happens to anyone else."
The courtroom was packed on the day of Barbara Hendricks' sentencing. Sarah sat in the gallery next to Dr. Morrison, watching as the judge reviewed the case file. Barbara had been found guilty on multiple counts: insurance fraud, identity theft, reckless endangerment, and attempted voluntary manslaughter. The attempted murder charge hadn't stuck. The prosecution couldn't definitively prove Barbara had intended for David Chen to die, but the lesser charge was still significant. David Chen, Linda's husband, sat in the front row with his wife. He looked healthy, recovered from the surgery that had saved his life, despite being completely unintended. His latest scan showed no signs of cancer recurrence. He was monitored closely now, vigilant about his health in a way he hadn't been before. David Chen Hendricks sat on the opposite side of the courtroom with Margaret. He too had recovered well, his cancer gone, his prognosis excellent, but his face showed the emotional toll of knowing his sister-in-law had been willing to risk someone else's life to save his. He had testified at the trial, speaking painfully about his gratitude for survival, but his horror at the cost. The judge spoke, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "Ms. Hendricks, you exploited a system designed to help people, including your own family. You placed an innocent man at risk of serious harm or death for financial gain and to secure medical care for your husband through fraudulent means. While the court acknowledges that your actions were motivated by desperation and love, they were nonetheless criminal and dangerous." Barbara stood at the defense table, her expression blank. She had testified in her own defense, explaining that she had never wanted anyone to hurt, that the life insurance policy was just meant to offset their debts if something went wrong, not an intended outcome. The jury hadn't believed her. "I hereby sentence you to 12 years in state prison with the possibility of parole after 8 years. You will also be required to pay restitution to both David Chen and David Chen Hendricks for the emotional distress and medical complications arising from your actions." 12 years. Sarah felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. Justice had been served, but it didn't erase what happened. It didn't erase the trauma that multiple people had experienced. It didn't bring back the innocence of a system that everyone had trusted. After the sentencing, Sarah stood outside the courthouse as people filed out. Linda Chen approached her, David by his side. "Thank you for being here," Linda said. "I needed to see it through," Sarah replied. "All of it." David extended his hand to Sarah. "I know this has been hard on you. I want you to know that I don't blame you. I never did. You were doing your job. Someone else was doing crime." Sarah shook his hand, feeling emotion swell in her chest. "How are you doing? Really?" "I'm good. Cancer-free for 18 months now. I see an oncologist every 3 months. I take nothing for granted anymore." He smiled slightly. "In a weird way, the worst thing that ever happened to me saved my life. I don't know how to feel about that." "You're allowed to feel complicated about it," Sarah said. "I do." Margaret and David Chen Hendricks approached as well. The four of them stood together, an unlikely group bound by shared trauma. "We wanted to tell you something," Margaret said to Sarah. "The four of us have talked a lot over the past year. We've become friends, oddly enough. Trauma bonding, the therapists call it. And we've decided to do something together." "What's that?" Sarah asked. "We're starting a foundation," David Chen Hendricks explained, "for people who can't afford cancer treatment. In Barbara's twisted way, she was trying to solve a real problem, the fact that people die because they can't afford medical care. She chose a criminal path, but the underlying issue is real. We want to fund treatment for people who fall through the insurance gaps, so that no one else feels desperate enough to do what Barbara did. We've secured initial funding. We're calling it the Second Chance Foundation." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "That's beautiful. But how are you funding it? That must take significant money." The two couples exchanged glances. David Chen, Linda's husband, spoke. "My life insurance policy paid out, not because I died, but because I was able to cancel it.
and the insurance company, when they learned the full story, returned all premiums paid plus damages for the fraudulent policy. That money is the seed funding, plus the hospital made a significant donation as part of their commitment to patient safety. "We want you to be on the board," Margaret said to Sarah, "to help guide the foundation. You understand the healthcare system. You understand what can go wrong. We need that perspective." Sarah was overwhelmed. I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it," Linda urged. "You don't have to decide now, but we'd be honored to have you involved." Sarah nodded, unable to speak through her tears.
Dr. Morrison found Sarah later that day in her office at the hospital. Sarah had returned to work after the sentencing, needing the normalcy of routine. Her role in patient safety had evolved significantly over 18 months. She now oversaw the implementation of safety protocols across 3 hospitals in the healthcare system. The Chen protocol had been adopted nationally, featured in medical journals and patient safety conferences. "How are you holding up?" Morrison asked, settling into the chair across from Sarah's desk. "I'm okay. It feels like closure, finally." "Good, because I have a proposal for you." Morrison smiled. "The healthcare system wants to create a new position, Director of Patient Safety Innovation. The role would involve traveling to hospitals around the country, teaching the Chen protocol, consulting on safety procedures, and basically becoming the face of patient safety advocacy." Sarah's eyes widened. "That's a huge role." "It is, and you're the only person qualified for it. You've lived through the worst-case scenario. You've rebuilt yourself. You've turned tragedy into meaningful change. Hospitals need to hear your story." "I don't know if I'm ready to be that public about what happened." Morrison leaned forward. "Sarah, you've been teaching about this for 18 months now. You've trained hundreds of nurses and staff members. You've already been public about it within the healthcare community. This is just a broader platform. And you'll have the power to implement change at a systemic level, not just at individual hospitals." Sarah thought about the journey she had taken. From the nurse who checked in the wrong patient, who felt her career was over, who blamed herself for a crime someone else had committed, to the patient safety advocate who had helped reshape how hospitals verify patient identities and prevent fraud. "Can I ask you something? Do you think I'm running toward something or running away from something? Am I doing this because I'm genuinely passionate about patient safety or because I'm trying to atone for what happened?" Morrison considered the question carefully. "Maybe both. Maybe it doesn't matter. What matters is that you're doing meaningful work that saves lives. Your motivation can be complex. Most people's motivations are. I still think about him sometimes. David Chen, looking at me with trust in his eyes, signing that consent form even though something felt wrong to him. He trusted the system. He trusted me, and I failed him." "You didn't fail him, Sarah. Barbara Hendricks created a scheme specifically designed to make everyone fail. But here's what I want you to remember. David Chen is alive. He's healthy. He's cancer-free. Yes, he went through unnecessary trauma. Yes, the situation was created by criminal fraud. But the outcome was that a man who had undiagnosed cancer got treatment that saved his life. That's not nothing." Linda said something similar, that I saved her husband's life by making a mistake. It's not that simple, and Linda knows that. But there's a kernel of truth there. In medicine, sometimes the wrong path leads to the right destination. It doesn't excuse the errors along the way, but it does complicate the narrative of failure. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she said, "I'll take the position, on one condition." "What's that?" "I want to include Barbara's story in my presentations. Not to demonize her, but to humanize the problem. She was desperate to save someone she loved. She worked in healthcare for 15 years. She wasn't a monster. She was a human being who made catastrophic choices. I want people to understand that healthcare fraud doesn't just come from organized crime. Sometimes it comes from inside our own institutions, from people we trust, people who were facing impossible situations. Morrison smiled. That's exactly the kind of nuanced thinking this role needs. You're not just teaching protocols. You're teaching people to think critically about the systems they work in and the vulnerabilities those systems have. When would I start? Next month. That gives you time to transition your current responsibilities and prepare for your first speaking engagement. It's at the National Patient Safety Conference in Chicago. 3,000 attendees. No pressure. Sarah laughed, feeling nervous, but also excited. No pressure at all.
Sarah stood backstage at the conference center in Denver, waiting to deliver her keynote address. She had spoken at dozens of conferences over the past 2 years, but the nerves never completely went away. She was about to tell her story to 1,500 healthcare professionals, doctors, nurses, administrators, patient safety officers. The Chen Protocol was now standard practice in hospitals across the country. Some states had even codified it into law, requiring specific verification procedures for patients with similar names or identifying information. Medical errors related to patient misidentification had dropped by 34% in hospitals that had implemented the full protocol. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from Linda Chen. Watched your TED Talk with David. You're changing the world. Proud to know you. Sarah smiled. The TED Talk had been filmed 2 months ago and had just been released. In it, she told the full story of the incident, including her own mistakes, Barbara's scheme, and the unexpected outcome that saved a life. The talk had already garnered millions of views and sparked conversations about healthcare system vulnerabilities. Another text came through, this time from Dr. Morrison. Remember, you're not just a nurse who made a mistake. You're a nurse who learned from it and helped thousands of others learn too. Now go inspire some people. The organizer approached. Ms. Mitchell, you're on in 2 minutes. Sarah took a deep breath, straightened her jacket, and walked toward the stage. The auditorium was massive, filled with healthcare professionals who had all experienced their own near misses, their own moments of doubt, their own system failures. She stepped into the spotlight, looked out at the audience, and began. 3 years ago, I sent the wrong patient into surgery. His name was David Chen. He was supposed to have a simple cyst removed from his back. Instead, he underwent a partial hepatectomy, major liver surgery for cancer he didn't know he had. And in the process, I discovered that the healthcare system I trusted had been compromised by someone I worked with, someone who had deliberately created a situation where following every protocol still led to the wrong outcome. The audience was silent, attentive. I'm not here to tell you that everything worked out fine. The patient I sent into surgery was traumatized. Another patient with the same name nearly missed his life-saving surgery. I spent months questioning my competence, my career choice, my value as a healthcare professional. But I'm also here to tell you that from that crisis came meaningful change, not just for me, but for healthcare systems across the country. She clicked to the first slide, showing the before and after statistics of patient misidentification errors. This is the Chen Protocol, named after the 2 men whose lives were forever changed by one scheduling coordinator's fraudulent scheme. It's a comprehensive system for verifying patient identity that goes beyond checking wristbands and ID numbers. It requires us to listen when patients express confusion or concern. It requires redundant checks at multiple points in the care process. It requires us to trust our instincts when something feels wrong, even when the paperwork says everything is right. She talked for 45 minutes, telling the full story, explaining the protocol, answering questions about implementation. But she ended with a message that went beyond procedures and policies. Here's what I want you to take away from this. Healthcare systems will always have vulnerabilities. People will always make mistakes, and sometimes bad actors will exploit those vulnerabilities for their own purposes. But the measure of a good healthcare system isn't whether errors happen. It's what we do when they do. Do we cover them up? Do we blame individuals? Or do we learn from them?
Do we change our systems? Do we support the people involved in making sure they can continue to provide excellent care? She paused, looking out at the faces in the audience. I made a mistake. They could have ended my career. Instead, it became my life's work. I'm standing here today not despite what happened, but because of it. And every day I work to make sure that no nurse, no doctor, no healthcare professional has to go through what I went through. That's the power of turning crisis into change. That's the power of learning from our mistakes instead of being destroyed by them. The applause was thunderous. People stood. Sarah felt emotions swell in her chest but kept her composure. This was what she did now. She told her story so others could learn from it. She turned her worst professional moment into a teaching tool that was saving lives. After the presentation, people lined up to talk to her. Nurses who had experienced their own near misses. Administrators who wanted to implement the protocol at their hospitals. Doctors who had questions about specific scenarios. A woman waited until the end of the line. She was young, maybe 25, wearing scrubs that suggested she had come straight from a shift. Ms. Mitchell, my name is Rachel. I'm a new nurse, just finished my first year. And I wanted to tell you that 6 months ago, I caught a patient misidentification because of the Chen protocol. A woman came in for a routine colonoscopy, but her wristband didn't match the consent form by 1 digit, just 1 digit. The old me would have assumed it was a typo and continued. But I remembered your protocol. I stopped everything. Turned out there was another patient with the same name scheduled for the same procedure on the same day. We almost gave the wrong person sedation. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. You saved someone from unnecessary trauma. No, she said. You did. Your protocol did. I just followed it. And I wanted you to know that what happened to you, it mattered. It changed how I practice nursing. It probably saved someone's life. Sarah hugged this young nurse she'd never met before, this woman who represented thousands of healthcare professionals who had learned from the Chen protocol, who were implementing it every day, who were catching errors before they became a crisis. This was the legacy of that terrible day 3 years ago. Not the mistake, but the response to it. Not the failure, but the growth that came from it. Sarah Mitchell had sent the wrong patient into surgery. She had been part of a system failure that traumatized innocent people, but she had also helped create a solution that was preventing the same tragedy from happening to others. In the end, that was what mattered. Not perfection, but persistence. Not avoiding mistakes, but learning from them. Not running from her past, but using it to build a better future. She was a nurse. She would always be a nurse, and her job was to protect patients even when the systems designed to help them sometimes failed. That was the message she would continue to carry to hospitals around the world. That was the story she would continue to tell. Because in healthcare, every mistake is an opportunity to learn. Every failure is a chance to improve. And every crisis can become a catalyst for change. If you're willing to face it, if you're willing to learn from it, if you're willing to turn your worst moment into your life's work.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.